Today's topic is on sensory processes, and it's one of the fundamental vital topics in the topic of introduction to psychology. We have done something close to this during the alpha semester, Psych 111, but we need to explode and expand more on it this time around. This has a lot to do with psychology, and that's why biology is a compulsory requirement in psychology. We expect you to have basic understanding of how the physiology, the anatomy and physiology of the human system, because they have a lot to do with how we behave. As you're going to see very soon, your sensation will determine your perception, and your perception will determine the way you behave. And so this week we'll be focusing on sensation. If there's anything wrong with your sensory organs, and I hope by now you still remember the sensory organs, I wish I have time to start asking you to respond to me. But because of the scenario, I know all your mind is on the test now, which is, you just need to relax. It's just objective, and they're just 10 questions. They're very easy. In less than 5 minutes, you will finish it. So it's better you just concentrate and relax, and don't be too uptight about the test, and pick and learn something from what I'm sharing with you now. So we have 5 basic sensory organs, which has to do with the sensation. Before perception, you must have sensation. If there's no sensation, there can be perception. Perception is not what now leads to conception. And then conception will now lead to cognition. That's when you now begin to have your thinking processes in place. So you need to understand that progression. And of course, that will ultimately now determine your behavior. So you can see the sequence. And that's why we need to study and understand the process of sensation, which has to do with all your sensory organs, as it were, which includes, of course, the eye, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the skin. Of course, the largest organ in the body is the skin, spread all over your body. So in this particular lecture, I'll be focusing basically on 3 of the major sensory organs. Of course, the 2 major sensory organs that determines your level of learning a lot is the eyes and the ears. Those are the 2 major platforms on which we learn. And so I'll be dwelling, first of all, but before we go there, let's explore some of the basic concepts concerning sensation. First, you need to understand that the physical process during which our sensory organs respond to external stimuli is called sensation. The moment any of your sensory organs can pick the signal from the external context or internal context, internal environment, and can pick it and then convert it into action potential, sensation has taken place. But if it's not, because it must, and of course that signal must reach a particular threshold, and I'm going to talk about that, before it can undergo what we call transduction. It's also a part of the concepts you need to understand when we are discussing sensation, So during sensation, our sense organs are engaging in what we call transduction. Take note of that word highlighted yellow. All these key words, if I'm going to be assessing you, most of the assessment will be linked with some of these key words. So you need to make sure you understand these key words. We can call them definition of terms. So transduction basically is the conversion of one form of energy into another. And this is always taking place during sensation, as it were. Now, the sound, as I'm speaking to you now, is coming to you in form of sound energy. This gadget was able to pass it across to you out there, and then it disturbs the air, and then the sound waves begin to resonate, and then enters into your eardrum, and then the eardrum amplifies it until eventually it gets to your cochlea. And when it gets to your cochlea, and particularly basilar membrane, and then it gets to the basilar membrane, because there are some nerves, sensory nerves that are attached to the basilar membrane, they're able to now convert, if it reaches a particular threshold, that sound energy is now converted into electrical energy, which of course, through the process of the release of this opening of the sodium pump, and then which will now ignite the action potential to be created, and then there's a reversal, of course, in the potential or within the cell membrane of the neuron, which now, of course, causes the creation of action potential. So at that moment, the sound energy is converted or transduced into electrical energy. That's what we mean by transduction. And when it gets to the synapse again, that electrical energy is now converted again to chemical energy the moment those neurotransmitters are provoked and released. It is converted again to chemical energy. So you can see a lot of transduction taking place within the neural system, all in the process of carrying the message from the external or internal context across to the brain. Transduction is taking place, which is conversion of energy from one form to another. I hope you understand that. That's actually what transduction is all about. I hope if they ask you to write on transduction, you shouldn't use less than a page or more to be able to discuss that. Another particular term, which I've already explained before, you need to be aware of when we are discussing sensation and, is the absolute threshold. I've mentioned that each sense organ, like our eyes, our tongue, for instance, require a minimal amount of stimulation to be able to detect stimulus and ignite and for transduction to take place. If the strength of that information is not strong enough, there's no way transduction can take place, or there's no way action potential can be generated. So there must be a minimal amount. That's what we call absolute threshold that can ignite action potential. That's what we call absolute threshold. And there are various ways actually of assessing this. And so this way, for instance, the way we measure absolute threshold is by using a method called signal detection. This process involves presenting stimuli of various intensities because there's a particular cause that are done on auditory perception. And it is possible that you can begin to increase the threshold from 0 decibel gradually until you get to the point when you discover that the person can detect the sound. That minimal point by which the person can detect the sound is what we call the threshold, the absolute threshold. So this is so easy. You can easily do this by using that gadget they use in when it comes to auditory perception, audiometric. When you can easily adjust the threshold of the sound from 0 decibel gradually until you get to the point when the person can detect the sound. That point when the person can detect the sound, that is the absolute threshold. And I'm beginning to we've discovered that it varies from one person to the other, depending on the quality of your sensory organ, as it were. So some can see far. The same thing when it comes to the eye, perception through the eyes, the same thing will have absolute threshold are different. The same thing when it comes to touch, and so it varies from one sensory organ and from one person to the other. So that's we use signal detection for that, as it were. And then you also have some terminologies like it, miss, false alarm, correct rejection. You need to understand what this means. Now, when you correctly indicate that the sound was heard, that is what you call a hit. Now, but when you fail to do so, that is, you cannot detect a sound that was made or particular stimulus that was passed across, you can't design it correctly, that's a miss. Then when you indicate that a sound was heard when there was no such sound, that is a false alarm. And of course, when you are able to correctly identify when a sound wasn't played, then that is a correct rejection. So you need to be familiar with some of these terminologies. These are all general terms when it comes to sensation that I'm just sharing with you. Another one you need to be familiar with is the Weber's law. This law actually, we discovered that when there's a large magnitude of difference between sensations, then you're able to notice the difference. But when the difference between the sensations are very close, or the stimulus, you discover that you find it very difficult to discern if there's a difference. For instance, if you are given two weights of 10 pounds and 11 pounds, it's not very easy for you to detect the difference, unlike when you are given a weight of 1 pound and 2 pounds, or maybe 1 pound, let's say 1 pound and 5 pounds, or 5 kilograms and 10 kilograms. So you're able to quickly discern the difference. But if it's between 11 kilogram and 12 kilogram, it will be more difficult for you to design the difference between those two weights. So that actually what Weber's law is actually insinuating. Of course, it's couched more in technical terms, but it's good you understand the sense behind Weber's law, and that's what he's talking about. Now we can now quickly go into the visual system. We still have about 10 minutes because the test actually is programmed for 10, 12, 25. So now for visuals, the visual system, of course, is basically your eyes. And the human being, and we're going to focus on that of human beings as well. The visual system, which is the eye, receives physical stimuli in the form of light and sends that stimuli as electrical signals to the brain, which interprets the signal as images. Now, of course, this particular rough diagram you're seeing here is showing the anatomy of the human eye. You can see right there, you know, the cornea, you can see the iris, you can see, of course, the retina at the bottom here, and then you can also see, of course, there are fluids. You have the vitreous humor, and then you have the one externally aqueous humor outside, which helps to maintain the shape of the eye. Of course, you have the lens that can easily elongate and can be pulled by the ciliary muscle to adjust the light coming in from the external context into the eyes, as it were. So you need to know, you should be able to give us a kind of annotated diagram of the eye, because there's no way we can be discussing sensory sensation without you being able to draw and label and tell us the function of the major parts of the eye. So I want to draw your attention to that you should pay attention to this and make sure that you are able to at least be able to draw and label and tell us the function. That's what we call the anatomy and physiology of the eye. Anatomy is having to do with the structure, and the physiology is having to do with the functions. So the functions of the various parts of the eye.
No, never saw
that is very critical.
Big object.
So I need to be drawing your attention to what you should be paying. I mean, what is important for you to note, especially in relation to assessment. That's why I'm asking. When I teach like this, I try to draw your attention to what is important and what you need to know. So the issue of anatomy, I mean, being able to draw an annotated diagram of the eye is very critical. And that means that you should be able to correctly draw and label and tell us the function of the various parts of the eye and what they do. And so I'm going to quickly run through some of them. The pupil, the light, of course, enters through the pupil. That's the space between the iris, you know. And you need to understand that when you are looking at objects, actually what happens is that light is bouncing off all those objects. And it's those light rays that will enter through your cornea, and then through your pupil, and then will run through. And of course, the fluids, both the aqueous and vitreous humor, those fluids, they serve as a kind of refracting agents. Though they tend to refract the light rays, and then tend to focus the light rays on the retina as much as possible. Of course, with the adjustment of the ciliary muscle, you know, which will now, if the object is far, that's the way the ciliary muscle will pull the lens so that it can more focus the object on the retina. So until the thing is properly focused on the retina. So the pupil is that space. So the space can either be reduced or elongated to allow more light to come in, depending on the intensity of light in your environment. That's the way that one works, of course. And then once the light rays passes through the pupils, it will now pass through the lens, which now focuses the image on the thin layer of the cell at the back of your eye. So that is the way that one works until it gets to the retina. And then from the retina is actually the most sensitive part of the eye, as it was. We're going to see, we're going to come back to the retina, which have two major cells, type of cells, the rods and the cones. You need to take note of that. I'm going to talk about that very soon. But meanwhile, let me talk to you a little bit about binocular vision. you will need to observe that each eye has a way of focusing on object, and they tend to see the object separately. It's within the brain and in the eye that actually the two images are collapsed together. So bi has to do with two. So there are two kind of visions for every human being. The two separate eyeballs, they are picking the objects and having images for the objects. So two images, any object you are seeing, there are two. But because the way the brain has its own program to collapse the two together, so you will see them as one, quite all right. But the two eyes are picking two images. That's why we said human beings, we have binocular vision. And so those two images are actually transported in. And you can do a simple experiment. If you put a pencil in front of your eyes, if you put a pencil in front of your eyes, and then if you put a white background, let that be, maybe the color of the pencil is yellow or red, and let that be a white background, and then you just stretch it. Close one eye, and then look at the pencil, then suddenly move your eye to the other one, see the other again. You will see that it will appear as if the object, the pencil is shifting. That's to confirm that you are having binocular vision. So the brain will now integrate the two images to give you, a three-dimensional perception of what you are seeing. And that is actually part of the awesome wisdom of God for perception. And all these have implications, and they are applying some of this knowledge even in computer games now to give you more vivid three-dimensional images that are very, very interesting to watch some of these films now. And they're coming up with some of these kind of gadgets. Okay, so that is the way it is. When it's 10:20, I'm going to pause, but let me just see if I can just finish that of the eye at least before we go on. So this is how the video games manufacturer they've been able to create the perception of 3Ds without special glasses. Two slightly different images are presented on top of one another to give you that particular dimension. It's an application of the way the eye operates. That's what, in fact, that is actually, part of what they're using now these days. They call it biotechnology, taking the knowledge from the biological nature, from biology, to apply it in engineering. So bioengineering, biotechnology is the vogue now, and we expect even those of us in psychology to be doing the same thing. You just see the way the human body is working, and then you apply that knowledge to solve the problem in your environment. These are part of the principles of creativity and problem-solving skills. So I've already explained how transduction basically takes place. It is the rod and the cones that are located on the retina that are responsible for this transduction. And it is important to note that the rod is primarily responsible for perception of light, whether it is dim or color, while the cone is for perception of color. Take note of that. The rod, perception of light, the cones, they are for perception of colors. And so some people can have, when they have experienced what we call color blindness, there may be a problem with their cones, as it were. And so those are the basic things that you need to know about the rod and the cones. Of course, the moment transduction, I hope by now you understand what is transduction, the conversion of that like light energy into electrical energy. The rods and the cone are responsible for that. And then the optic nerve will now pick the information in form of action potential and then transport it across, into the brain, and the part of the brain responsible for interpretation of information from the eye is the primary visual cortex, where the information is now interpreted. And that is what now gives birth. So basically, that is the bit about the eye. So I'm going to pause here so that, I don't know, I'm sure you don't have room for questions because you are very eager for your test, quite all right. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to give you the password to your test. I want to encourage you, make sure your internet is working very well.